What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. Appreciate you stopping in. Today we're going to continue our beginner guide question series. This is part 2. We're going to go ahead and answer some basic questions and common questions that beginners have when it comes to cycling a reef tank. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, number 1, how long does it take for a reef tank to cycle? Now this is going to depend on the method that you choose to cycle your reef tank. Now I personally like to use the old school, which is just either adding a piece of shrimp and letting it break down, or adding food on a daily basis to a reef tank, letting it produce the bacteria that way. Now that usually takes between 4 to 6 weeks. Now there are methods that involve just adding bacteria from a bottle into the reef tank where you can add fish the next day or actually at that moment. I've never used those personally. I know people who have, and I just personally like to use it the old school way because I know that it gives plenty of time for the proper bacteria and the proper amount of bacteria to actually populate to be able to break down waste efficiently. Okay, number 2. How do I start the cycling process within my new reef tank? Now there's going to be a couple things you're going to look at before you start adding anything to the tank, and that's going to be your temperature and your salinity. Now the appropriate range for temperature is between 77 and 80 degrees, and for salinity it's 1.023 and 1.0265. Now when you start getting coral and you start wanting to add coral or at least get into that realm of things, you're going to want to narrow those numbers down. So I like to shoot for that early on just because that's my personality, but if I was going to choose a specific number of each one, I would choose 79 to 79.5 in temperature, and I would shoot for 1.025 to 1.026 salinity. I would stay within those ranges at all times if possible. Okay, now that your temperature and your salinity are in the appropriate ranges, it's time to add a food source which will allow beneficial bacteria to grow and reproduce. Now, there's a couple methods you can do. You can either add the bacteria that I mentioned in the previous video. I choose to go a different route than that, but by all means, if you want to try that and see how it does, go ahead and do that. I personally like to add a food source either on a daily basis or a one-time thing. Now, as for the daily basis, you can add like a piece of pellet food or flake food that you would feed a freshwater tank or whatever. Just put a little bit in every day over the next few weeks and kind of let it just break down in starting that process. Now, what you can do besides that, if you don't want to feed the tank every day, is just go ahead and take a piece of shrimp. I personally like to put it in a mesh bag because the shrimp will start breaking down and kind of spreading over the tank. So leave it in a mesh bag or a filter sock or something like that, and then just letting it sit in the tank for the next 4 to 6 weeks. That will complete the whole process and allow the bacteria to grow and populate off that food. Now you might be asking yourself, how does a piece of shrimp start producing bacteria and cycling my tank? Well, basically what happens is that piece of shrimp is going to rot and break down. Now, one of the byproducts of rotting food and feces is ammonia. Now, what happens is there's a bacteria that will come along and it will eat the ammonia, and as a byproduct, it will produce nitrites. And then in some time, another type of bacteria will come through and eat the nitrites, turning it into nitrates. Now, there are further processes deep within the rock if we can get into in a later video, but ideally, you're left with nitrates, okay? So most people get rid of nitrates in a couple ways. Most of the time, people just get rid of nitrates via water changes, your biweekly water changes of 20 or 30%. Some of us use biopellet reactors or refugium, stuff like that. But ideally, after the whole process is said and done, you're going to go from ammonia to nitrites to nitrites to nitrates, and then you're going to manually remove the nitrates from the reef tank. All right, let's move on. Number 3, can I use fish to cycle my reef tank instead of using bacteria or a piece of shrimp? Now, yes, you can use a fish if you want to, but I personally would never use a fish to cycle reef tank, and let me explain why. Number 1, fish are, I have a sweet spot in my heart for fish. I would never expose them to elements that are just not good for them. So when you put a fish brand new into your reef tank, you're going to get ammonia spikes. Ammonia is not good for the gills. It could shorten the life of the fish itself. Now, some people are like, well, I'm going to go buy a $5 damsel and throw it into the tank. Well, I have 6 $5 damsels in my reef tank, and I love them. They're great fish. I have no reason to expose them to elements and potentially kill them. I think that's cruel, but you can do whatever you want. It's a free country, and it's a free world for the most part. Now, moving on to the second reason, most people who set up your equipment and buy their equipment from the local fish store usually go back to that fish store to buy, well, fish. Now, you might be just going to buy a damsel or a clownfish so you can cycle your tank. Okay, now you didn't quarantine that fish. You just put a fish into your reef tank that was never quarantined. You don't know what it has. So worst case scenario, you take a clownfish or a damsel, it looks healthy at the store, you plop it in your reef tank, it ends up getting ick. Now what happens is the fish will most likely die because of ick. You're not treating it, so it's going to go ahead and die. And then your tank is infested with ick regardless if the fish dies or not. So now what happens? Well, you have to let your tank run without fish for about 8 to 10 weeks so the ick parasite will actually die, which just defeated the whole purpose of using a fish in the first place to cycle your tank. Now, if you have fish in another system that you know are healthy, and you can go ahead and you feel like sacrificing fish that you've had for a while and you know are healthy to use them to cycle another tank, by all means do what you want to do. But a lot of people don't think about that. You set up a tank, you're going to go buy a fish that you don't know if it's healthy or not, and you're going to have take the potential of actually infesting the new tank that you just set up. So think about that stuff before you make decisions. Okay, moving on. Number 4, will using live rock cycle my tank faster? Yes, using live rock from an established aquarium or rock from the ocean will definitely cycle the tank faster. Now, when it comes to rock from the aquarium side of things, you're going to be a little bit better off that way, and I'll explain why here in a second. But getting rock or using like a marine pure block that you've had in the sump for a long time, hence that's what I'm doing now for the new build, you'll be able to just add that rock to a new system and it will have the beneficial bacteria that will produce and populate on the rock that you have in the tank. So if you're using, 100 pounds of dry rock and 10 pounds of live rock, that live rock will seed all that other dry rock, allowing it to have beneficial bacteria not only on the surface but within the rock. Now, when it comes to rock from the ocean, you kind of have to be careful just in the beginning. Now, when rock is being moved from the ocean and processed and sent to you via UPS or whatever, it's going to have some die off. It's going to have like sponges die, coral die, just different things will die on that rock. Now, say you set up a tank that's 125 gallons and you put in 100 pounds of live rock from the ocean. Well, there's going to be a significant amount of die off, and just like the shrimp, it's going to produce ammonia. Now, you're going to get an ammonia spike pretty early on. Now, what a lot of people do is they usually do about a 30% or so water change about a week later after setting up a tank with just live rock to kind of bring the ammonia down, depending on how much die-off there is. It's going to be different in every situation, but just be aware that I wouldn't go ahead and add a fish in either one of those situations immediately. For the aquarium side of things, I'd wait a couple days. When it comes to the live rock from the ocean, I'd wait at least a week or two, letting that ammonia spike kind of come down and process as normal. All right, number 5, how do I know that my tank is completely cycled and ready for fish? Well, throughout the cycling process, you're going to be testing ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. You're going to have a spike in ammonia, then you're going to have a spike in nitrites, and then eventually your nitrates will start creeping up. Now, the tank is completely cycled when you have 0 ammonia, 0 nitrites, and you have just nitrates left. Now, that means that your tank is good to go, ready for fish, but please understand that if you go ahead and you add 10 fish at one time, you're going to get another ammonia spike when you test in like a few days or so. And then, nitrites might come up a little bit, and then eventually, it'll go back to nitrates. But just be aware that you're going to want to add fish slowly because the bio load has to adjust for every fish that you add. So just keep that in mind. All right, number 6, when is it safe to add fish? Now, I kind of answered this in the previous question, but I'm going to add a couple things to it. Of course, when you have just nitrates, no nitrites or ammonia, it's safe to add fish slowly over a period of time. It's also safe to add fish after you've already quarantined them for a minimum of 4 to 5 weeks, also treating for parasites with copper or Prazipro or some other internal bacteria medicine. Just make sure you treat your fish as needed or do preventative treatment. You'll be good to go. Another thing that a lot of people are going to do, and I mentioned this in previous videos, if you're just setting up a reef tank for the first time, go ahead and set up the tank, but also set up a quarantine system aside or next to that tank. And then go ahead and quarantine fish for the period of 4 to 6 weeks while you're cycling the tank. That way, when the cycling process is over, you can go ahead and put your clean, healthy, happy fish into their new environment without worrying about introducing any external parasites. So just a little food for thought on that one. Okay, number 7, should I run my lights during the cycling process? It's up to you. You don't have to. It doesn't negatively impact the system or the process at all. If you want to, go ahead. I know a lot of people were just setting up their tank. Last thing they want to do is look at a dark tank for 6 to 8 weeks. That'd be pretty depressing. It's not a very good way to start out. So if you choose to have your lights on, have them on a timer and have them set to a schedule. Okay, number 8, this will be the last question in this video, is when should I do my first water change? Now, I personally like to do mine after I've added a fish or two, after I have just nitrates in the system. I usually wait about a week or so and then do my first 20 or 30% water change. It doesn't matter. You can do it before you add fish or after. It doesn't really matter. It's what works best for you. Now, the only exception to that would be is if you were using the live rock from the ocean that I mentioned previous. I still recommend you do a 30% or so about a week in, but that's going to be dictated by what kind of die off and how much die off you had. If you you have to do a water change if you feel you need to. So that's on you. The thing with the reef tank, guys, you guys gotta understand that these are just guidelines. These are just suggestions, I would say, that I've seen that have been successful and that have, I've seen work time after time after time. But nothing is written in stone. What works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. So, just play by ear. If you have a huge amount of nitrates after the cycle, do a water change. Do a 30, 40, 50% water change. Get those nitrates down. One thing that you'll find out, guys, with a reef tank is if you have elevated nitrates and phosphates in your system for an extended period of time, you'll find that when you go to remove those nutrients after a while, you're going to have a hard time lowering your numbers. And the reason for this is rock is like a sponge. It literally is. It will suck in all the nutrients from the tank and it will hold them. So when you go to add clean water and stuff like that, you're going to have to deal with rock leaching nutrients back into the tank. So if you have a really, really high amount of nitrates after your cycle, do a bigger water change. It's really going to be dictated by your situation. All right. Well, guys, that's about it for this video. I appreciate you watching. I hope it was helpful, specifically for those of you who are just starting out and either gathering information or you've already jumped into the hobby and you're trying to figure out what's going on. I hope it was helpful. Now, this is just part 2 of this series. Now, I do plan on getting out at least 1 video on this series a week. If I can get 2, great. Now, I don't know how long it's going to go for. There's always going to be topics to talk about. I'm getting suggestions on a daily basis. So I really don't know how long it's going to go for, but I'm going to get the information out while I'm still ticking. So either way, guys, if you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Peace.